Відбудови і реконструкції громад в Україні, фаза друга, що є частиною програми «Сталий розвиток» через вдосконалене місцеве самоврядування, яке називається абревіатурно SDLG, що реалізовується Агенцією міжнародного співробітництва Асоціації муніципалітетів Королівства Нідерландів VNG International у партнерстві з Асоціацією міст України, ну і за фінансової підтримки Міністерства закордонних справ Королівства Нідерландів. Сьогодні, дорогі колеги, ми продовжуємо проведення стратегічних сесій для сталого розвитку територіальних громад. Ми продовжуємо запрошувати найкращих спікерів, які діляться своїм досвідом, своїми напрацюваннями, своїми порадами з посадовцями органів місцевого самоврядування в Україні. Сьогодні ми продовжуємо тему, яку ми почали аналізувати минулого тижня, в минулу середу. Сьогодні ми продовжуємо говорити про інструменти електронної демократії, про їхню ефективність. Ми продовжуємо говорити про те, як важливо залучити максимальну кількість мешканців, бути партисипантами, учасниками прийняття рішень в територіальних громадах, аби ці рішення були максимально ефективними і аби вони насправді впливали на життя громади, і аби вони насправді відповідали очікуванням наших мешканців. Дорогі колеги, сьогодні ми приймаємо в гостях прекрасного спікера, фахівця, непересічного фахівця у сфері роботи із даними, якого звати Міхкель Солвак. Міхкель Солвак є професором Тартуського університету в Естонії. Він є також керівником Центру досліджень, впливу IT і заступником декана з науково-дослідної роботи факультету соціальних наук Тартуського університету. Наукові інтереси пана Міхкеля Солвака охоплюють дослідження і поширення моделей використання цифрових послуг, цифрових сервісів, які підтримуються автоматизованими даними, також персоналізацію цифрових послуг, електронні вибори з використанням даних різних електронних процесів і електронних майданчиків, ну, а в тому числі і аналіз різних реєстрів і опитувань. Сьогодні ми будемо говорити з вами про те, як забезпечується доступ до публічної інформації, в тому числі відкритих даних, на цифрових майданчиках в ресурсі естонського досвіду. Ми будемо говорити про взаємодію державних та місцевих реєстрів, а також будемо говорити про взаємовідношення і взаємозастосування даних місцевої і державної статистики. Теми дуже цікаві, дорогі колеги. Отже, ще раз нагадую про правила роботи нашого електронного майданчика обговорень. Ми маємо з вами переклад, забезпечений в нижній панелі. Будь ласка, хто не змінив для себе зручну мову, ви вибираєте її на панелі налаштувань знизу. Ми маємо з вами можливість слухати англійську доріжку і можливість слухати українську доріжку. Оберіть, будь ласка, правильний переклад для себе. Переконайтеся, що він працює. Ми маємо перекладачів, які досить фахово сьогодні супроводжуватимуть нас впродовж наступної години роботи. Я також, дорогі колеги, нагадую про те, що з дозволу нашого сьогоднішнього спікера, Міхкеля Солвака, ви можете задавати запитання в процесі. То ви можете піднімати руку, ми надаємо слово, і не дочікуючи до завершення блоку презентаційного, ви можете дискусувати, ви можете давати ваші зауваження, можливо, якісь репліки висловлювати і так далі. І, будь ласка, не стримуйтеся в цьому, тому що нам важлива і цікава дискусія. Нам важлива і цікава ваша думка, наскільки може бути естонський досвід імплементований в українських реаліях, в реаліях, яких працюєте сьогодні ви. Ну і ще одне правило, давайте домовимося про те, що якщо у вас виникло якесь запитання, не тримайте його в собі. Якщо ви не готові його відразу миттєво озвучити, піднявши руку, напишіть його, будь ласка, в чаті. Тоді я його озвучу, і доктор Міхкель Солвак зможе на нього відповісти. Ну, ніби правила роботи обговорили. Ще раз нагадую, що сьогодні з нами працює доктор Міхкель Солвак, який очолює напрямок діджиталізації і електронної демократії у сфері досліджень Тартовського університету. А також з вами сьогодні працює команда VNG International. Ви бачите ззаду наш фірмовий фон, так що ті всі люди, які сидять з цим фірмовим тоном, це є команда VNG International. Так що вітання всім від команди і від керівниці проєкту VNG International в Україні пані Інни Семененко. Ми стартуємо, і я передаю слово Майклу. Будь ласка.
All right. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you. And I hope my presentation today will be of use to you, and very much looking forward to questions when you have those. So let me share my slides, and then we can start. Just a second. Great, I hope you can see them. So let's talk a bit about open data, its usage, how different ways of data sharing have been sort of thought of and implemented in the particular Estonian case, and how all of this has also then led to a bunch of different data-driven services. So all of those elements are very tightly connected. Of course, Ukrainian context might be different, but as the last time I was talking to some of you or meeting some of you, I would say Ukraine has also been showing real leadership in some of those, some very interesting applications that would probably fall under the way how open data should be used. But let's talk about these things a bit more in detail, because I mean there are many different ways how one can make a case for making data open, but I will focus today actually on the business case for it, because obviously there are many additional reasons why data should be open, and transparency obviously being the prime reason here. But when we really want to use that data not simply to ensure transparency for the ones who are interested in ensuring that this is the case, but we want to also generate a bit more public and business value out of it, and maybe thinking it through these types of, let's say, avenues makes a bit more sense. I mean, I presume every country in Europe nowadays has an open data portal. For EU countries, it's essentially also a requirement to make data open. That is also the case for Estonia. Here's simply a screenshot of this particular webpage. You can Google and get to this, which basically then serves three purposes. I mean, to get access to these particular data sets, these raw data sets, get the metadata of those data sets, because without high, good quality metadata, those data sets are usually a bit useless. But the prime actually role when you really want to develop services or make a business case out of it is probably actually API access, not necessarily data, but I'll get to that later on. You obviously need to understand what type of data is available, but in order to really run a service, a digital service, API access, and that's what you want to get. And there, if you look at these different scoreboards, how much data is being opened by governments, then there's a wide variety, obviously, in Europe. The Estonian case isn't one of the top in Europe, but for a very particular reason, because there's a conscious decision that, yes, we need to have open data, but to get truly value out of it, you not simply need to have a lot of accessible data sets, but we need APIs. So scoring in terms of the data sets available gives you one result, but if you start to look at how much APIs are available, then the picture might differ a bit. But what is the logic of those open data platforms, especially from a business point of view in the first place, is really, I mean, essentially a question of how to manage innovation. I mean, different ways people have been studying this for ages, but I would say the overwhelming consensus is still that actually this is something which is super difficult to govern. So the simplest option is not to govern it in the traditional sense, but to simply open it up as much as possible and simply allowing these innovative ideas to emerge. So essentially giving the tools, the resources, not to actively govern it so much. And we know that governments usually are a bit bad at innovating, but absolutely central in providing infrastructure, obviously for businesses as well. So maybe I would say this primary business case for opening data is actually by simply providing the infrastructure in terms of data, making that available, and not really necessarily trying to determine the exact final end user needs through developing of those particular solutions, but providing the data in order for someone else to get an idea of developing some sort of new business, for example. But let's look at those a bit more in detail, because I mean, I would say this is very much a combination of not simply data sets, but actually the overall infrastructure that generates that data and makes it available and makes it possible to actually merge and use that open data with data that is not necessarily open as well. Because these whole hybrid cases are the ones where you usually actually start to see different types of real, let's say, business value. Well, as I already said, the number one reason, obviously, to making data open is simply to spark potential new business models. Government doesn't do that, businesses do that, people have those ideas. We simply don't know where those might emerge, so the safest option to allow them to emerge is simply open the horizon for this emergence to occur. And where do they come from? No one really knows, but we can make certain that they are more likely to emerge when we simply make this data available on which to test prototypes, for example, develop prototypes, or simply do proof of concepts of ideas. So definitely to spark new business models. If I look at the particular Estonian case, then one very interesting real business case that has emerged out of government data being open, particular data being opened on different business registries and additional information that is collected at bulk on businesses, is that it has resulted in a lowering of barriers to market entry. What do I mean with that? There's a link here, which I won't click at the moment. You can later on, if you get the presentation, go and check it out. This is from an X-Road data exchange system. I'll talk about that later on as well. But one particular interesting case that has emerged out of this data being available and accessible through APIs or accessible through bulk data downloads from business registries are different business intelligence services. Because when you think about it, I mean, information obviously has a lot of value. So one particular barrier that has been there in the past is unequal access to information. But let me make it clear how this business intelligence part works by showing some empirical evidence here. This is and this particular system data and the logs of it are also open data in the Estonian case, so you can essentially go and see what type of data has been exchanged on a large scale. This is from a random month, it doesn't really matter, from this X-Road system. And what you see here in this pie chart is a particular registry that is responsible for 26% of all the queries running over this particular X-Road system, which is a registry of the Estonian Tax and Customs Board that holds information whether businesses have outstanding debts towards the government. Mostly then different types of taxes, either then VAT or different types of labor taxes, which they need to declare. And this is open information in a registry. Now, this particular bunch of queries, which made up essentially 1/4 of all the queries on that system has been the responsible party for these particular requests in an overwhelming amount of cases. Here we see particularly a breakdown of those businesses that have asked this particular information. Are a couple of businesses that have a business intelligence product. What does it mean? It means that they use this open data to compile reports on businesses. And when you are now a new business or you want to exchange in business transactions with someone, especially when you are a smaller business, then actually engaging in a business transaction without having good prior knowledge about this particular potential new partner, you expose yourself to a certain risk, risk that they might not pay the bills for the services that you are delivering or the goods. So even though you would have to ensure that through having a really tight contract, you would have to have more expenses on lawyers, on monitoring that this happens. So all different ways how you reduce your business risks in a business transaction. Now, the logic of these types of businesses is that actually they make the whole business environment more transparent by showing that what is the history of those businesses, even though they don't show debts, outstanding debts towards individual businesses between themselves, but an indicator that this particular business owns taxes to the government is a very good indicator that they are likely to actually be a problematic business partner for yourself as well. Now, because this is all open data, I can request get access to this particular portal that this business is providing and get these overviews of companies with a couple of mouse clicks. And as a result, the whole environment where businesses are interacting with each other should be a bit more even in terms of the access to information that is critical for engaging in business transactions. So this is a good example of data being made open, and then a business says that, okay, there's a service case here of business intelligence. Let's download that bulk, add additional analytical value to it, and make it then available for everyone who wants to do this for a charge, meaning that they monetize essentially open data. But it makes a lot of sense for me when, for example, I'm a small business. I don't know how to go and request data from particular registries, but I can get access to a couple of reports on businesses I want to work with maybe in the future for an X amount of euros. So I might not have the technical knowledge. Larger businesses have those technical knowledge anyway, where I can go and then get that information from registries themselves. But small and medium-sized businesses might not necessarily do that. They issue also credit scores for those companies, and it's all done based on open data, which is freely available through those registries. So I think it's a very nice example of actually a new business that has had overall effects on the market at large, meaning that they reduce those barriers for engaging in transactions. You need to spend a bit less on contracts. You can engage in businesses and transactions a bit faster. And let's be honest, you can reduce maybe your legal costs as well if you have done prior due diligence on who you are going to start to work with or engage in transactions with. So it's a very good example of open data being monetized, but for a purpose that actually is of benefit to the overall market. But I mean, these are all simple examples of how open data can be really turned into a business case, but this doesn't really happen only with data being made available, but the overall system, how data can be actually merged, open data can be merged with maybe not so open data, and how this data generating process is also taken into account, meaning that how we can start to ensure that this particular let's say cases where a certain type of data set is being available really scale, meaning scaling in a sense that we get these newer business models, more data emerges. As more data emerges, you start to get something that is referred to as network effects. So the value of this grows over time for every other participant in the network as well when there are more participants. So how the infrastructure around open data actually helps to spur those use cases of open data as well. There's a couple of really like this metaphor or essentially a bunch of organizing principles proposed by Tim O'Reilly in his Government as a Platform book, which has gotten a lot of citations, and I would say the Estonian system that also generates this open data is very much set up according to those Government as a Platform principles, where the data openness and accessibility is a key requirement. But the overall system around this should also be something that really scales and grows. We're going to look at this X-road system a bit later, but one key principle behind it is as well that you should have an open and simple system, which is very basic, and everything else is created essentially by the participants of that particular system. It's going to make sense once I start to show you how this Estonian data exchange systems actually work. So not to overcomplicate, but basically providing a system where individual participants who own their own services and data can actually start to build connections, and it's really easy to connect to this particular infrastructure and network. That's one principle, to provide a very basic infrastructure to exchange to engage in data exchange. And another one is that if you build that infrastructure, then it's the same logic with this innovation. Governments or not necessarily even particular service owners do not necessarily need know how these end users really want to have those services developed. So the logic there is that you basically essentially give access to those resources and the underlying data that is running those particular services. But the overall service infrastructure or new services should not necessarily be part of the mission of developing such a system, but you simply make it available, because in the end, if there's a market need for that particular type of service and the data is available, someone will pick it up and find and develop that service. And they will develop that service based on the end user needs that arise out of this market. The government usually doesn't necessarily have this knowledge, and let's be honest, they are not a profit-driven. Governments are not profit-driven organizations in the first place, so they are essentially insulated from the market a bit, which is always a very bad case for building new and good products when you don't have this pressure of the market immediately felt through essentially the mechanism of someone willing to pay for that particular service which you are making available. So let end user needs be defined by the end users and not necessarily the government system that allows this data to be used to provide services for those end users. And something which I already mentioned, any network, when you think about the network, then the value of being a member of that network exponentially grows when there are more members of those networks. So if you can ensure such a dynamic, then that is something that will grow naturally or evolve over time, because network effects mean that all participants see actually a larger monetary value of being part of the network as well. And as a result, new members come in, and the same type of services actually will start to be immediately used by a larger group as well. Again, I'm going to come back to this when we look at these actual data sharing logics that the Estonian system has. Okay, and finally, when we also think of these systems that can help this open and not open data jointly to develop as services, are also certain guiding principles where governments should be, let's say, a bit more experimental. Because when we talk about this government as a platform approach, with this open data as a key basic resource that is available there for businesses to operate and provide additional solutions, then clearly allowing for these business cases to be tested, obviously without accountability is important as well, meaning that the default let's say principle is that you actually allow access to data, experimentation of it. When it works, when it's a business case, then actually you can really start it and scale it fast. So the services are, the data is by definition not closed but open, and it's okay to actually test and fail with those particular cases, which is sometimes a sort of a difficult principle to implement, especially when those are government-owned services. But what we see with these types of data sets, especially, is that when you have a large scale of, let's say, data being generated for a digital service in the first place, then this A/B testing changes in user interfaces, testing changes in adding additional data sets and seeing whether the service can be more personalized, for example, is actually a very fast and cheap way how to test. And we know that the private sector does it anyway. So a system that relies on open data being generated and made available actually allows to test that more with government services as well. If the legal environment obviously allows that, but this A/B testing with data makes it really easy and fast. So the logic with this government as a platform is that you simply provide data access, interaction possibilities, and also say that essentially that the services that we have are in this so-called perpetual beta state, meaning that we always evaluate how do they work. We test how different changes have effects or not, and the ones that have good positive expected effects, we scale them. So service is never ready, and you can add these private sector additions to those services as well, meaning that when you have, for example, a large, or let's say the tax and customs, for example, they generate those data sets for the whole business population. You are willing to share that data with private sector business intelligence service providers, because you know that actually this makes your own service usability better as well, even though this is not part of formally using your developed state-driven and run services. Okay, but I'll get to those network aspects and testing data-driven services a bit later as well. Now, obviously, this is only the positive story I'm giving you at the moment in a relatively abstract manner as well. Again, we're going to look at actual service examples in a minute. But there are obviously limits to open data usage as well. The same Estonian open data portal, and this is something where you actually go and go look across Europe, you will see the same thing. If certain institutions are required to make their data open, and this is written into the law, so a certain amount of data needs to be made open. Then if that is the requirement that yes, data needs to be shared, then very frequently those open data portals might become dead data dumps. What does it mean? It means that yes, I make my data available, let's say once a year. I do a database query or a copy of it, and I yes, pseudonymize or anonymize if it's personal information, or I aggregate it in a certain way, and I simply then upload it into the portal, and that's it. The legal requirement of making data open has been fulfilled, but let's be honest, this data in most cases is completely useless. Especially when you go there, and this for example, in the Estonian case, you can go and check those statistics. This is the amount of data that's added in the last 30 days, so it was in the last month for these particular fields. And you see that actually in very many cases, nothing has been added. If you expand that period when the data was renewed or added, then the picture looks a bit different, but it's indicative of cases where for certain sectors and domains, the data that is put there is outdated, not copies of the very latest iterations. is outdated or even in worst cases is not machine readable, meaning a bunch of, let's say, document information system, or not, okay, document information systems probably not, but data sets that contain hundreds of thousands of PDFs, and PDFs that are not easily machine readable as well, then it's useless. So the fulfillment of the criteria of making data open has to be truly fulfilled, meaning that not simply ticking a box. And that's one particular reason why, for example, in the Estonian case, APIs actually have been chosen as the priority, not simply throwing data out. Yes, data should be out there as well, but this is only good, nicely usable when you do a preliminary analysis, but actually later on when you sort of, wait a minute, this type of data is usable for our product or adds to our product, then you actually need live access to the data. And that is only available through an API. How to ensure that? That's the key thing. I mean, this exact failure, allowing for testing and then giving data out for someone else to try and get an idea is something that needs to be inherently actually in the mindset of the data owner as well. Because when you simply need to fulfill the law and throw data out, that doesn't actually provide value to yourself as well. This is an additional cost for any public sector organization having to provide data access. This is a pure cost, yeah. Because you need to work on your other, let's say, core business anyway. But if you see that actually as through making that, someone else uses your data and might be coming back to you with an idea that, wait a minute, we did an analysis and we either have a product that might improve your own service, or we are going to, we did an analysis, or some private person did an analysis that actually shows that there are certain issues with your service thanks to this particular data being made open. Then this is actually real value that the data owner gets back. This is something that is referred to also as co-creation of a service, meaning that you make it available not because you have to make it available, but you make it available because you see value in making it available, actual business value, because your own product might be improved through that. So the data owner would actually have to actively curate this data, make it available, advertise it, together with this data availability, also list problems that they would like someone to take a look at, and not simply ticking a box of making it available and that's it. So this data, this philosophy of open data actually needs to be internalized by the public sector, I would say, a bit more, obviously in the Estonian case as well, by really demonstrating that, or looking at those use cases where it has provided actual clear business value for the organization or for businesses that use that to develop products, so that they actually start to curate their open data a bit more and develop APIs or make them available, which is also sometimes the case. Okay, so much for open data. Let's now take a look at how this data exchange then actually happens in the Estonian case, or how it theoretically sort of could happen as well. And we'll talk about it in a general sense, but looking at later on the actual services as well, because in the Estonian case, this is sort of probably a bit different from the Ukrainian case, that given that the country is so small and highly centralized, the local municipalities are using very large registries that the state holds, but are core to providing local services as well. So the same state-provided data exchange infrastructure between the registries actually is used heavily for local municipalities as well. So one actually doesn't need to make a difference between this local and the local municipalities and the services that they are providing and the state-provided service, because they all actually run on the same infrastructure, interestingly enough. But before we get to that, very briefly, in order for you to understand how it works, the Estonian e-governance infrastructure essentially relies on three central things. Yeah, one is digital identification of citizens, I'm gonna talk very briefly about that. Then the data exchange layer, that is the core system, where I'm going to spend a bit more time on, and then those application layers. Those are then those actual services that depend on the data exchange layer to work partially on open data as well. So these three things. Now the digital identification is available since 2000. I won't spend too much time on it. So every Estonian citizen has a digital ID. It's based on this public key infrastructure. Sorry, I don't know whether Ukraine has something similar, but it's very widely used across the board, and accessing all those digital services nowadays works for that as well. It used to be on a smart card. In 2007, it became available through a public key infrastructure capable SIM card as well, so you could sign and authenticate documents or access services with the phone as well. And since 2018, there's an app-based system called Smart ID available as well, and it's being very widely used. But that is only to ensure that the citizens interacting with services or governments are indeed those people that we want, that are eligible for that. Yeah. Okay, but the service provision needs, that's where the data exchange thing comes in. For example, you have a bunch of state databases. The biggest and most important in the Estonian case is the population registry that holds information who lives where. And there's additional social demographics on that person as well. You have the tax board, which collects tax information. You have the state portal, which is the access portal for different types of digital services. You have your bank, you have the telecoms company, and some sort of enterprise resource planning software that needs to communicate with you as a client, for example, as well. So you have very different parties. That in order to provide a good quality service, and I didn't put this municipality here, but the municipality obviously is a key component here as well, that need to exchange data in order to provide service. What does it mean, for example, for a local municipality, if it's a service that the state is providing based on your municipal belonging, basically like schooling or kindergarten services or different types of benefits that local municipalities pay out, and the number one thing that the municipality needs to know is that whether that person that accesses that service actually truly is registered as a resident of that particular municipality. That information sits in the population registry, so the municipality actually would have to check from the population registry whether the client that turned to them really truly is a person living in their city, for example. So they actually need data sharing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to provide the service to the person or determine the eligibility. But all of that needs to happen. I mean, essentially, then all of those systems that do that talking need to be interoperable, and at the same time, obviously, retaining data security as well, because communicating with a state registry from a municipality point of view might be difficult, because municipalities are quite different in terms of their capacity. And I won't even name how small some Estonian municipalities are, because Ukrainians probably wouldn't believe that you can be that small. We have municipalities that have less than 1,000 people as residents, who are then responsible providing services at their municipal level, obviously. But who would then, for example, have to provide the same level of services, digital services as well, as municipalities that have 100,000 people, or I mean, the city of Tallinn close to 500,000. So they are not comparable in their capacity to provide services, but they would, for example, have to retain the same data security when they go and fetch data from different types of registries. So the solution in the Estonian case is a system that is called X-Road, where all of those municipalities have then access to. But there are different ways how to organize this data exchange. These are simply four potential examples here. The Estonian system is the most sort of closest to this distributed architecture, the fourth type. You might have different types of ways how to do that. Yeah? You might simply have a centralized database where all different registries essentially sit together. Usually it's not a very good idea. It's a major security problem as well. and probably actually very hard to administer as well. You might have something that is referred to as Central Enterprise Service Bus, which is essentially an integration layer on top of services as well, but there the services and data exchange happens through this centralized system still. Not a single central database, different databases, but the service layer is fully centralized. You might have a four-corner model, which when you have heard of the EU's e-delivery system, which is being rolled out across the European Union, that's a four-corner model which they are using. So basically the data owners are not directly exchanging data in the backend, but there's a set of access points through which they can do that. And then there's a distributed architecture system. I mean, all of those have their benefits, but you would ideally select a system that basically maximizes all of those 5 criteria which you have here. Should be cheap to operate, should be easy administratively to manage. I mean, obviously, it should ensure information security as much as you can. And if you look at those different architectures, then they have quite different ways of security is ensured. And obviously be flexible and scalable. And some of them are much more flexible and scalable than others, especially when you compare a central database and this distributed architecture in terms of scalability. They definitely are in completely different worlds. So the Estonian system, this data exchange layer actually is a distributed system called X-Road. There's a schematic picture of it, meaning that all of those members here are still individual free members, meaning the population registry is run by the Ministry of Interior in the Estonian case, who has a set of services which they make available for other X-Road members. So, for example, a municipality like the city of Tartu, the home city of Tartu University, is also a member of X-Road. And when they now, for example, need to go and get information on whether I, for example, when I apply for some sort of local benefit or need to send my kid to the school, then they need to check whether I'm truly a citizen of the city of Tartu, where I'm registered, where my place of residence is. Then they actually access the population service, population registry service that is designed to provide that information on people. So the population registry has a bunch of different services made available, and city of Tartu consumes, for example, some of them. Now, the beauty of this type and the whole traffic actually is obviously encrypted, but actually flows over, runs over the public internet. So it's very resource efficient, meaning that there's a bunch of individual actors that exchange information over the public web in secure format. Now, every member is an individual service, individual member of X-Road. So the service owners, data or service consumers, all are members of this. So, for example, when a service consumer would need, or let's say someone who would like to develop an additional service, businesses are members here as well, telcos, for example, but other private businesses as well, would like to provide a service when they would have to get access to the population registry and the tax board, for example, who both have their list of services available. Then they actually can merge those different types of services under their own service umbrella, and they individually then exchange information with the population registry and the tax board. Now, it still means that the system has some sort of oversight. So the authenticity of the members need to be somehow exchanged and ensured, and the data exchange needs to be secured as well. These things are ensured by something that is referred to as the X-Road Center. I'll show you another schematic picture here. On the right is an actual snapshot of the X-Road, which is a picture of the internet, so necessarily not overly interesting. Basically, a picture of a network. The larger nodes, the larger green dots here are actual registries. And the smaller dots are the ones that mostly then go and fetch information. Now the X-Road has a member or a center which is called the X-Road Center. That actually then does those things which you need to have in order to all the network members to be able to trust each other. So the center is the one that registers those members. Either than population registry, that's the biggest service provider actually anyway. But for example, if I'm a private business that wants to get access to X-Road as a system, I need to register with the center and then I'm provided access to it. They provide user support and supervision, which is obviously needed traffic monitoring because we see a bulk of Estonian digital services all running on X-Road. So simply monitoring that different services are running as intended is also part of them. Or not, let's say, not responsibility to look at services, but the responsibility to ensure that the traffic actually flows. And there are no, let's say, problems there. That's the task of the center. But those trust service management, that's the service center as well. So when they have, for example, ensured that this member is registered, then the other members can be certain that this is a legitimate member on the X-Road as well. And then obviously all kinds of timestamping and certification services which need to be there in order to have proper interactions. That's done by the center as well. All these services are maintained by the center. Now, how that then actually looks in terms of service exchanges that, or how, for example, the exchange actually looks like. A very brief example of a central log. I'm going to come back to that a bit later. This is all open data actually. So it's a technical log of information being exchanged. This is a technical log from a hospital system accessing a e-health registry, which holds information on the e-health records of a person. So if you check into a hospital, the hospital gets the right to access your digital e-health record. And this is the log of that particular thing happening on the X-Road. So they fetch the information over the X-Road. What we see here, this is an abbreviated version of it. The open data obviously is the metadata of that particular log request, service request essentially. So a service request to get access to the system. The actual content of that message obviously isn't open data. This is the actual information of the on that particular person. But the metadata is open. So that gives a lot of interesting opportunities to do analysis, for example, if you're interested in that. But I'll get to that a bit later as well. The actual exchange of data is not run through a central system or the center, but between members. So what the center actually simply does is that they simply log that meta information that yes, this particular, in the case the tax board, for example, fetched information from the population registry, or City of Tartu fetched information from the tax board and the population registry. So when you get access to this particular system, doesn't mean that you get access to all the data sets. You are simply becoming a member of a network, and in order to access individual data sets or individual registries, you need to have individual agreements with that particular data or registry owner that you can do that. So the City of Tartu needs to have an individual agreement with the population registry that they can access population information, and they can. Now, why is that? The idea behind that is exactly this certain principles which I referred to in the beginning. If you look at the system or the, let's say, the schematic picture of it a bit, you have public sector, you have public sector registries, you have private sector companies, you have the center that monitors the logs, you have, let's say, then the part where the citizens check that, or check whether they are able to access services or not. And there's a bunch of user interfaces for citizens as well, but everything essentially through an adapter server and security server runs on the public web. And this is, when you think about it, a very simple system. meaning that every individual service owner is still responsible for their service. Simply, the barrier to accessing their service for everyone else is drastically lowered. They access, and this is another service where sort of you can request to get help with that, access the network, make individual agreements with the registry owners, and after that start to exchange information immediately. So all the protocols, all the services are standardized. So you simply plug into the system and accept those particular standards, and you can start to exchange this particular information. And this is by definition of a network that allows for network effects. Because when you have, for example, the population registry there, and you have only the tax and customs board, two large registry owners, that information isn't particularly valuable because there are simply two network members. Yeah? There's only one way how this information can flow between the parts. You add a third partner, and the value of that particular information becomes already more available because this third partner might start to see that, wait a minute, I can use population registry and tax and customs board data to do something with it. The actual value of that data for the registry owners grows because the demand for their service grows as well. And the more you allow, the easier to access that, the easier the system will start to grow as well, and the value of the information grows because more members become part of it. So this has led to, and those numbers I don't have here at the moment, you can go and check this link, which is the English language fact sheet, which then shows live how the service request numbers grow, has led to an exponential growth in usage of data because this particular simple network system allows everyone to fast and easy access information. And well, open data is not necessarily part of this, but if you merge then this, and this is now closed information, not everything there obviously is open, and you wouldn't need to run it on Xroad when it would be open data, but you can merge that then with particular open data sets and the tax and customs board. Even though they provide this particular type of information in an open data portal as well, they have a bunch of APIs and the Xroad services where you as a company can then use all of those. Again, with the idea that the registry owner necessarily might not have a good idea how that data is being valuable, could become valuable to someone else, but this someone else might have an idea that there's a case for it, and simply making it available spurs that particular type of exchange. So if you are now a small municipality, then actually the same principles apply for you as well. Most of those different types of service providers also provide you something which is called the MISP, or Mini Information System Portal, meaning that if for municipalities maybe that's not even an issue, but for example, if you are a family doctor, meaning that you are a practitioner, yeah, you need to have access to e-health record of your patients. That sits actually in a central database run by the Ministry of Social Affairs, that essentially they are the registry owner there. You are a small practice where you actually don't have an IT person on the payroll, and you don't know how to access the Xroad. But what you can actually get access to are those pre-developed mini information system portals. Obviously, it comes a bit at cost, but you pay that cost that it's being set up for you, and after that, this particular family doctor's practice can get access to patient information through the e-health system. So regardless of your level of resource availability, you can actually start to consume those digital services. And the same applies for municipalities as well, because if you look at this particular network picture, it doesn't really matter. You have 500,000 citizens, you have 1,000 citizens, you run a small medical practice, or you run a large hospital. They all run on the same system. A large hospital simply has more resources, and they might not access this particular network through a predefined MISP that is made available to them, but they have maybe an IT department in-house that then that are a bit more self, let's say, development as well. Not self IT development, which gives them slightly better value when they access that particular type of information. So basically, it evens out the users, and as a result, it grows really fast and easy. Now, when we talk about the security, data security, obviously there's a security server that encrypts that information, but if you talk about the larger security environment as well, again, it has certain benefits that obviously are the most clearly, let's say, demonstrated by Ukrainian case as well. Distributed systems are more resilient, meaning if you take out certain nodes, the whole network doesn't collapse. Yes, there would be a problem when the population registry, for example, would be attacked and then taken off the network. Multiple services depend on that, but it wouldn't lead to a cascade and complete breakdown of the system as such. So a distributed system gives you a larger, let's say, resilience by design as well, which is something which you might want to have when you have a very many services that are running on data, and you don't want to have a centralized database for that. But that's already a larger question of its state information system design. But this distributed system has allowed relatively small and resource poor members also to access the same level of services than others. So clearly has been beneficial or instrumental in user numbers and service numbers growing all the time over time. Okay, so much for the underlying infrastructure or certain principles within the infrastructure as well that have led to this particular type of exchange happening fast and at scale as well. Let's look at some of those services from the application layer then as well, in order for you to see how then these different types of data exchanges have allowed for new services being developed, which weren't, let's say, possible previously. And I have a couple of examples from the labor market from different, let's say, particular needs, and these are all state-provided services, and I'm gonna in the end talk a bit about future, let's say, developments as well, which are only available because we have these types of data sets generated through and available partially through open data and the X-root system as well. Okay, first is something which is called OTT in Estonia, which is actually a boy's name, but it also stands as an abbreviation for decision support in the Estonian case. What is that? That is run by the Estonian Unemployment Insurance Board, which is the insurance provider in Estonia, and also provides those active labor market policies. So retraining of unemployed people, for example, paying out those unemployment benefits, that all happens within that institution. So it's one of the largest in terms of the budgets in the Estonian public sector. In the Estonian case, depending on the year, but currently we roughly see that around 70,000 people a year experience unemployment. Again, the country is small, bear that in mind. And the way that happens when a person loses the job, they need to register as unemployed, and then basically they go to the unemployment insurance fund in order to get benefits and, let's say, either placement into a new job or certain retrainings, for example, if they are interested in that. And this is a system that is severely undermanned. When you look at it, we all, for the whole republic, have around 120 so-called case managers, which handle those more difficult unemployed people, difficult cases, meaning people who are at risk of long-term unemployment. And then you have around 220, 250 job mediation council. Oh, no, sorry, these are the number of clients. The actual number of people is slightly different. So these two types of people, case managers and job mediation counselors. They have large individual portfolios, so they spend either 45 or 25 minutes per person, and that's pretty much it. Now, the result of this is that certain people are not given enough support because of the lack of time, while others actually who need a lot of support, the ones who might not need support get more, and the ones who might need more support get less because of the large inflow of clients and the amount of time available to them. So the logic behind this system, which runs partially on data being exchanged over the X round as well, is to reduce two things. Excessive support, meaning that a person who does not actually need state help, who we can say that, okay, lost the job, but is between jobs at the moment, gets a bit of benefits, but it moves out into employment again within the next month or two. And the other way around, the ones who actually we know need a bit more support because they have a high risk of becoming long-term unemployed actually don't really get enough help because the client handlers simply don't have time for that. Now, the system that helps them to optimize their own workflow is called the OTT system, and it works actually by using this data that is now available through different registries. It uses 5 years of training data about the unemployed. It uses data that is being fetched through over X-Road from multiple data sources. The number one, obviously, is tax and customs board that holds information on prior employment of the person, holds information on the income of the person, prior income level, obviously. So the whole job history actually is registered there because we have a job registry maintained, an employment registry maintained by the Tax and Customs Board. So information from there, information from the Estonian education information system, which holds information on the classification, education level of the person and what type of trainings have they had. So this information is again over the X-Road fetched on that particular person and merged with the larger data sets. Multiple other different types of data sets as well that then are fetched by the unemployment insurance board when the person walks in over the X-Road from these different types of registries. And the system itself is a machine learning model, a boosting algorithm, if you're interested in that, that then actually simply does two things. Calculates probabilities. Two probabilities. One is the probability of being employed within 180 days. And the other one is a probability of being unemployed again within a certain time period. So essentially two numbers. And the use case of that particular service, it uses data points on the individual going back 5 years, and the amount of variables used there depends a bit on the model iteration, is between 45 and 50 data points on a particular person. It computes those two probabilities, and then the client counselor, who then needs to work with that particular person, looks at this risk scoring of that particular individual and looks where in these two risk matrix of one probability and two probabilities crossed, where does that person actually is. And if you look at this particular picture, then, for example, someone who has a very high probability of being employed again, but a very, sorry, there's a typo here, a very low probability of becoming unemployed again, is the perfect client of someone who you shouldn't actually help. You shouldn't waste their time, your time, state resources, because this is a person who is very likely to be really fast moving into employment again. So they might be getting benefits for a month, but they definitely shouldn't be assigned to retraining. Retraining comes with a certain amount of time being used for that. The person is actively being kept away from the labor market. So it would be a waste of time and public resources when that person would be assigned retraining and forced to do that, because partially in order to get the benefits, you would have to go through certain types of retraining as well, even though that kicks in after a certain period. But at the same time, for example, someone who is here in this risk matrix, that's a person who is has a very low probability of becoming employed, and unfortunately a high probability of losing the job again if they become employed. Yeah? So this is usually someone who is in a seasonal work, so off and on in terms of employment. You ideally would like to move that person away from this particular pattern into stable employment and better employment as well. So this is definitely a person that needs help, that needs probably retraining, new skills. The logic of this particular system is it does that on everyone on a daily basis. The model is retrained every quarter, but the person, the risks are calculated on a daily basis for the whole client portfolio, and actual public employee who then is tasked within the unemployment insurance fund of helping those people optimizes their own workflow with that. And it also is used vertically through the organization, because when you think about it, this essentially is an example of an individual optimizing their own workflow. So this is really a case where the organization is making individual workers a bit more efficient. But the thing what you also then start to see, and this is a nice example where it has been used to really start to guide the organization as well, is that we now get the risk portfolio of all individual client counselors. When we aggregate this now into a regional bureau level, then this regional bureau manager starts to see how his or her individual client managers are handling those client risks. Some are doing it a bit better, some are doing it a bit worse. This is also a high-stress job, so there's a lot of turnover, meaning that you would like to reassign clients maybe to counselors who have a better ability to work with high-risk clients, for example. So you manage actually the bureau with that as well, because you see those risk distributions in the portfolios of those client counselors. At the regional level, you see how the risk distributions of those different bureaus are, and you can start to see actually, because this is live data, meaning that as people become unemployed, you start to already see these effects, because this is probably an indicator that things are going wrong in the labor market, because certain people are being let go. So you start to see a regional picture as fast as this unfortunately happens to people. And now on the state level, you also have then an overview of how those risk distributions within the society differ according to region, according to domain, and can start to think of how to manage this a bit better with either policies or services. So even though the score is computed at the individual level on that particular person using registered information, it's aggregated and used vertically across the organization, within the organization. I would say a good example where you try to squeeze maximum value out of data, yeah? Because catching or collecting data, as you probably know, that's a very expensive thing. But if that data is being already collected anyways, then using it and reusing it is super cheap. So if you have built a system that is already essentially, let's say, doing those calculations, has already merged those data sets, aggregation of it is doable with relatively simple tools, Power BI, certain other business intelligence software that can be used for management decisions as well. And the beauty of it is then the management has access to live information, essentially, because of the generation of this data happening on the operational level where people actually meet the public service. Yeah. Okay. A couple of lessons learned from that particular system, because we actually were instrumental in building that from the university point of view as well. It's being used on a daily basis now. That actually has a relatively sophisticated machine learning algorithm underneath it, but when you think about it, then what would have to happen is that the person who actually engages in these transactions with the individual citizen would somehow have to understand that this is a machine-produced score on that individual. I mean, it probably is a bit limited because it only sees registry information, so not registry information about how motivated that person is. Obviously, is not coming from that particular model. I mean, the model has no idea about that, because the data simply isn't there for that. So how to make this person and the machine produced score truly interact in the most beneficial way for the citizen, that's actually difficult. And difficult because the client handler needs to understand what does this machine learning model actually do. In order to actively disagree or agree with it as well, because in the end, there has to be a human-made decision about certain benefits, for example, or certain retrainings. So the client counselor needs to have a critical reading ability of a machine learning model. And when you think about client counselors, usually training in social work or something like that, not mathematics or applied statistics, not computer science, so understanding how machine learning works becomes a challenge. And obviously they need to get actionable information out of it as well, because getting an information that why this particular person has a high risk is only useful for them when they, through their intervention, through their retraining offer, can actually change that. So all kinds of information that is not changeable by their intervention, by definition, isn't also actionable. Yeah? So they need to know that, okay, this is because the person has a low skill level, or this is because a person has certain types of draining caps. Again, something that you can address, so you can intervene. Okay, let's move further a bit, because I'm otherwise sort of getting stuck in a monologue here. Let's look at other services as well, because one thing is that this is the very operational level where you then provide certain services based on this particular data sets, purely data driven. We couldn't do that before having access to this particular data. But something where sort of noticed that this is unfortunately still not very much being taken into account, but at the same time, obviously, what you also want to do is to get a better understanding whether the service, the one that you might be providing in a data-intensive way, meaning that you depend on the registries, whether it actually works. Which is, you might think of a stupid no-brainer question, but I'm amazed how many public institutions actually really don't know whether what they're doing is making a true difference. And forget about the scheme here. Sorry, this is not to confuse you, but essentially we need, when we are running a public service, we want to do, I would say, or want to know 4 things. First thing, obviously, we want to know whether we are efficient, meaning whether what we do is the most efficient way to do that, meaning how efficient is an organization in providing the service. Yeah? The more efficient, the better. Yeah? But the number 2 thing from the citizen point of view actually is whether it's effective as well, meaning not whether it's cheaply run, but whether it brings the effect. Yeah? So I can have a public service from the labor market point of view, for example, that is super cheap for the state to give and efficient to run for the organization as well. But when it's actually not making a difference of helping people into better employment faster, then it's still a waste of money, because it might be efficient, but it's not effective. So I want to have both from the organization point of view efficiency, and from the citizen point of view it needs to be effective. And obviously cost benefit and cost effectiveness as well. I would like to see those numbers in order to then decide what to do, because ideally you'd like to scale services that are efficient to run, are highly effective, are highly cost benefit, and the cost benefit calculation is very positive, so there being more benefits than costs, and are cost effective as well. So meaning they are best, let's say, cheapest to run, but bring the biggest public effects. Now, this is relatively simple and no-brainer, but when you start to think about it, it's actually not so easy to do. And that's what we, let's say, from the academic point of view, that's what we do, or let's say, I wouldn't say on a daily basis, but we do need to run those impact assessment models, meaning that we need to understand why certain public sector interventions, service interventions are bringing effects and why others aren't bringing effects. The simplest option to do that is to do impact assessment with something that is referred to as counterfactual impact assessment methods, where we look at individuals who have gotten the service and the ones who haven't gotten the service, but those groups are comparable. So those groups are as similar as possible. And then we said, okay, the difference that we are now observing, that is truly the service effect. Now, coming back to this labor market service example, in the Estonian case, and that's unfortunately still in multiple other European countries as well, you obviously cannot speed up the sort of policy cycle in a sense that, okay, we see that certain domains we want to change policy, we discuss it, we draw up certain instruments, apply them, see how it works, reevaluate, run it again. This whole cycle we cannot really speed up, but what we can speed up is these impact assessment parts. Because when it's a highly data-driven service already, it means that as part of the provision of that particular service, data is generated anyway. If that data is already generated, why not do this impact assessment in as a service as well? So automate something that is otherwise done after a certain period. In the Estonian case, in this particular unemployment insurance fund case, all of the services, this active labor market services, need to go through an impact assessment evaluation in order to understand whether they're actually working. However, in the past, that was done on a static basis, meaning that it went through a study, data was taken from registries, assessment was done, a report was produced, so you found out did it work or not. But the problem was that because there are so many of those services, each individual service went through this impact assessment cycle maybe after 2, 3, in worst cases after 5 years. So imagine you have a service that costs for a public purse, I don't know, 10 million euros a year to run. You run it, you provide it, and after 5 years, there's an impact assessment study that says that this actually doesn't have an effect. 10 million euros to run a year, 5 years, 50 million euros have been spent without actually really knowing that, wait a minute, it's not working, it's not bringing the benefits. But it's easy to actually automate because the methods are there, and if the data is being generated, then it's easy to do with the data sets as well. Because how does it actually work? I'll skip through that slide really fast. The logic of it is certain people get the service, other people don't get the service. They're not comparable because they're structurally different. But the logic with those quasi-experimental counterfactual methods are that, okay, yes, they are different, but let's select from those two groups, that some who got, others who didn't, groups that are actually similar. And this is implemented here through something that is referred to as propensity score matching. So if we find out what individuals are exactly the same, the only difference is that some got the service, others didn't. What does it mean? It means that the same in terms of gender, prior income, employment history, region, you name it. Everything is the same except some got the service, others didn't. And then we simply compare them. And this has been fully automated now in that particular institution. And sorry, this is in Estonian. Very briefly tell you what you see here. This is a live impact assessment of a particular service that the unemployment insurance fund provides. And this shows the difference in becoming employed after a certain period for a particular training. And the different graphs here are for different Estonian regions. So the service owner actually sees that whether their particular service actually works or not, meaning that whether the person who has come through that service has a higher probability of becoming employed than compared to someone who hasn't gotten that service, which is a standard impact assessment question. Does it really work? And we see in this particular examples here that these indeed work, but in some regions they work a bit worse than others. And the same impact assessment has been done for quality of work, which is measured by salary. You want to see whether it helps people into better employment, and we can monitor that as well. And the idea behind that is then that the service owner sees on a monthly basis, does it work or not? And if from a certain period onwards, we see that it isn't really working, this is a prime example for a candidate of a service that should be discontinued, or should be offered maybe in one region and not in other. Sorry, this is for the pay part, and you see that in one region there's a high positive effect. It works, in other regions not really. Again, should be offered in that region maybe more at scale, discontinued in others because it doesn't make sense for the client. And because the services are offered as society functions, we essentially get a live estimation of whether this service works or not. Yes, there's a certain latency period. You cannot discontinue something immediately, but it's way better than knowing 5 or even 2 years later that what we did didn't work. We can start to see that immediately, and then we can start to make changes a bit faster. And the same for cost-benefit analysis. If you have done the impact assessment, does it actually work? So the effectiveness estimation. You want to do a cost-benefit analysis as well. And this is the same picture for one particular service, where on the left you have the costs and on the right you have the benefits. Benefits are the amount of labor tax paid by the person if they get employed. And the training, you see that this is barely cost beneficial, meaning that the costs are a bit lower than the benefits which we're going to get future out of this particular service. So when this whole particular cycle has been automated, then not only can we get fast information if the service is working or not, but we can start to make decisions about larger budgetary implications a bit faster as well, and simply see where waste in the public sector happens, not because of simple waste, but because of services being ineffective. These usually are larger, let's say, cost items than simply some sort of wasteful process in terms of inefficiency. Because these large, especially social services, different social services that have a particular end goal, in most cases, probably the number one budget items after healthcare, we can actually make larger monetary decisions a bit faster. And that is the logic behind this. Okay. A couple of examples more, and I won't spend so much time on those here, and then we have to finally, I haven't gotten any questions, but we can do a short Q&A in the end as well, then when people don't have questions immediately at the moment. Those technical systems, the same X-Road actually produces a lot of technical log information that can be used for further service development as well. Not only what type of registers are being used, but how people actually are consuming public services. And there's a whole initiative now to try to see that whether we could then push and become a bit more proactive. What are proactive services? Services become proactive when, for example, a certain trigger unleashes this particular service to be pushed towards a person, meaning that the person no longer, the citizen no longer needs to pull that service, ask for it. But if they become eligible, they immediately get a service offer from the state point of view. Obviously, it makes sense in some cases, not in others. There's a slight problem of how to do that also because what we see is that this event is some event in someone's life that leads to this, let's say, need to get access to the service. That is then met with a bunch of different services from the state point of view. But we don't necessarily know how in combined they actually help with responding to that event in a person's life, whether they take care of all the needs that pop up around that particular service. So you can then essentially have a definition of this proactive service that is based on a theoretical understanding that, let's say, the law says when this happens, a person becomes eligible for these types of services. So this is a purely, let's say, theoretical definition of the event. Could also be an empirical definition of it. Let's simply see what happens when a trigger is detected. What does the person actually do, which is another definition of all the needs that arise out of this particular service. And then we have this detection methods of those as well. One is after the event, which is the observation happened. Now we start the service. The other one is a prediction. Now, how does it actually look like? There are very few of them still live. For example, this is a process flow of a life event service, which is a service of marriage. So you can get married through an e-service in Estonia, meaning, and I won't spend too much time on it, but simply the process of it. The different colors here demonstrate what different organizations are responsible for certain actions when that service is being offered. And essentially, these are two. One is the population registry. The other one is the police and border guard, because they are the ones who issue identity documents. So a person basically puts in a request to get married. They need to get an agreement, obviously, from the partner as well. In the end, it's registered in the population registry. And if a person also wants to change the name, then documents need to be changed as well. Prior, you needed to go and individually tell the service owner that I want to do this, please do this, please do this, please do this. Logic with this life event service is that this is now automated, meaning a request comes in and the person then actively gets pushed the information that, okay, please agree to this or disagree to this. They can then do their individual choices, but the whole logic is that underneath it are still those old services, one owned by the population registry, the other one owned by the police and border guard. But on top of it is an integration layer, and this partially runs on X-Road as well, meaning an integration layer for a portal where a person then actually puts in requests, and underneath it, this information system essentially exchange queries and then push that information to the person, and it becomes a bit easier and faster to get married if that is a pressing problem. You can get divorced in Estonia digitally as well. That probably is a bigger, let's say, a situation where you would not like to meet too many people and do it digitally only, but okay, jokes aside. But what we see from these particular types of services are how differently people actually consume services, digital services as well. These are a couple of examples. One on the left is a designed process of steps that the person needs to go in order to get the end result. It's all from technical logs of the systems. And on the right, for example, there is a picture of one individual process of an individual consuming a digital service, and you see a lot of steps and cycling around as well going on. And that is what we see from those technical logs. And these are beautiful, let's say, examples where we could start to optimize the process, because design process is one, reality is quite different. And you would like to see that why do those different types of pathways, why do they differ? That is the whole logic of this proactive service as well. Because they probably differ because the individual needs are different. Yeah? The citizen needs differ. So now we know empirically that the needs differ. The next step is to personalize then the service offering based on those individual needs that seem to be leading to quite different types of consumption patterns of otherwise designed process that should be followed in sequential steps. One way how that is done is through this digital service portals where you can essentially a web page that gives you access to all of those individual services that are still run by individual service owners, but where a person logs in and then clicks through the portal, accesses services, ends up on another service platform, but at least we have the technical information, how do they ended up there. And if you click, for example, family, you get a bunch of services that are available. And when a person clicks on that, we actually within the portal obviously have this information logged. And the result is that we start to see how those different pathways to services actually look like. There's certain problems with it. I won't spend too much time on that because in the end, there's technical logs, so it might be a bit difficult to understand why this person actually ended up there. because we have relatively limited information, even though all of those clicks as visible there. But what we see from that data already anyway, and again, because of this now being digitally supported, we actually see this information. We see that the usage of the service is completely different depending on social demographics, yeah? Which is a prime indicator that people have different needs. I mean, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that that is indeed the case. Now we simply have empirical proof of that, and now we simply have empirical proof that if you look at two different types of sessions from that portal, and again, the details don't matter here. One is a session that ended up with a high satisfaction score. The other one is a session that ended up with a low satisfaction score. And immediately, there might not seem like much of a difference, sort of a spider web of steps. But if you start to look into it, what type of steps were taken, you start to see that these individuals differ. The social demographics might have differed as well. So we should provide different types of service bundles to an individual that went through this type of path compared to someone who is here. Yeah? And yeah, I mean, some really sort of intuitive results that come out of it as well that can be now used to personalize this portal access in order to give the fastest and best user experience to the individual. For example, in this unexpected case, the very last point here, we saw that younger people, which again, I mean, makes a lot of sense in hindsight, they start immediately with simply searching for the service. And they go to the search and get the results and they are satisfied with it. Whereas an older person clicks through the portal, looks for the service, in the end doesn't find it, then goes to the search and is super dissatisfied with the results. So two clients, both go to the search, one likes it, the other one hates it, but the reason is that one actually is used to consume services like that, or do a quick web search or consult ChatGPT and get the result, boom, immediately. Whereas the other one is still old school and likes to look for structured menus. Meaning that if either of those clients log in, for the younger groups, you probably should simply let them immediately do search functionality, not even providing them with these really long drop-down menus. Whereas for the older ones, you should individualize this and then based on where they actually ended up with, provide maybe certain bundles of services so that they wouldn't have to click and end up with the search, but would be faster in finding the results. So individualization of the menu, one really simple step to increase client satisfaction and access to services. That's the number one thing, increasing access, making it faster and simpler to use. Okay, and the final on that, and then I still have. Okay, I'm gonna end with a slightly other note just in a second. The very final way how that is currently being developed, and I think these large language models now make a large difference here and obviously globally as well, is that when you think about it, you have all of those registries available. We can merge them. We have individual identifiers for citizens, so we can see which types of services have they consumed together. The next thing is not to force them to go to a portal to fetch that service, not necessarily even go to a proactive service that measures or detects whether they have the need and then pushes a particular menu to them, but actually have a really simple integration layer in terms of a language model or a chatbot, and chatbots now obviously outdated because of the language models here, where you simply put in an abstract request or a need, and the language model or the chatbot then, because it has been trained based on prior user data, essentially provides you the answer that in order to get this particular need solved, here's a bunch of links, go to them, or here's a pre-filled document to fill these additional forms and submit it over there. or immediately already start to do certain types of registry interactions based on that particular individual's identified needs. So integration layer that uses a natural language processing or large language model in order to basically get rid of needing to have structured systems that have very different individuals setups. You simply go to immediate individualization through language. Okay, I'll skip that because there's a bit too much maybe here and talk about an interesting file to sort of cap with an interesting sort of, for me at least, development where we can, look further how much we could sort of predict certain things, because what I'm so much sort of have been talking about essentially reacting to consequences, yeah? That is in the public sector still the modus operandi for very good reasons, but dealing with consequences when you think about it is the most expensive thing, yeah? Because dealing with a person who has already become unemployed is expensive, where we could have prevented unemployment, maybe that would have been better. For all kinds of other events as well, when we would have been able to predict the risks and intervene before they actually realized in some sort of negative event for the person, we are actually already maybe saving public funds, especially when we talk about, for example, the healthcare. Yeah? Healthcare costs a number one item on the budget. Some things are super, let's say, lifestyle related. We could predict them quite accurately where the risks are. We could intervene before the risks cross a certain threshold and wouldn't have to be working so much with the consequences. But this is from another field. This is from something which Estonia has had a problem historically with. Maybe is a bit resonates with in the Ukrainian case as well, even though obviously the war is something which means that these types of sort of luxury projects cannot be pursued. But these are residential home fires in Estonia, and I'm showing you those numbers because this is an experimental project that ended up with the model actually working. Residential home fires, again, a small country, bear that in mind, is on a monthly basis. That's an example from the training data for a particular public service experiment that was done. So you see on a monthly basis, in the Estonia, it has gone down over time as well, starting in 2010. This is up until the end of 2019. So the newer data is a bit lower still, but roughly we're talking about 100 or 90 residential fires across the public, and these are super expensive and tragic events when you think about it. Obviously don't need to tell that to the Ukrainian audience, but in the estimations in the Estonian case is that the actual damage estimations that are done after those fires, which is the damage to the property and damage to the health of individuals, maybe capture only around 2 to 5% of the total societal costs that are associated with a fire, because we also, when the people who are either injured there need obviously treatment later on, or when they're killed, then the whole potential, let's say, value for society that the particular person could have provided by working, paying taxes, etc., won't happen. So we actually see a large negative event. So if you could prevent those, would be really good. But how do you prevent those? If you simply look at the calendar, this is open data. This is data from the Fire Rescue Board. You can go and get the actual number of events and a bit more detailed information as well, and do these types of analysis. If you do this analysis, you see, for example, that it has gone down over time, but it fluctuates, and it fluctuates. You don't, again, need to be a rocket scientist for that. You see that the numbers go up in winter and come back down in the summer. Yeah? So a really logical association with the temperature. If you look at the atmospheric temperature and the fires, if you put these two things on top of each other, you see that the fires go up when the temperature goes down, and the other way around, obviously, in the summer. the association is weaker over time because when you think about it, what actually is causing fires of residential home buildings, then this is again open data. After every accident, there's an investigation, and the results are made public in a database as well. Not public in a sense that you cannot identify individuals, etc., but you can find the causes of the accident. The number one victim of a fire accident in Estonian case is a male, more than 60 years old, living alone in a house that has a poor technical state, and most likely the person actually has some substance abuse problems, for example, alcoholism and things like that. So essentially, it's a combination of weather getting cold, people start to heat using unsafe heating sources, and this is more likely to happen people who are already socially disadvantaged. So basically a combination of weather, technical system, and people acting. Three things. And it's very strong association. So with negative temperatures, it goes way up, and with positive temperatures, there's essentially no association. So only winter under certain conditions. Now, we can predict that super accurately. Simple example here, I won't bother with the technical details. If you separate one part of this data set as so-called training data, the other one as test data, and we run a model that looks as simple as that. We plug in the temperature for positive temperatures and negative temperatures, and simply the year. And do estimation of something like that, if you I mean, these types of, it's a regression method, you learned that in high school, I presume, because Ukrainian math is usually pretty strong. So if you do now the prediction and look at the action, then the overlap is this, which you see here. The forecast is this purple circle, and the blue one is the actual number of fires. And see, with this super simple model that was trained on data up until 2016, I can predict the monthly fires for 2 years in advance, almost, not always, but in 80% of the cases, almost to the point. So I can look at the data now and say in January 2 years how many fires will happen, and it's super accurate. Unfortunately, and that is the thing where I say that open data is only so useful, this information, if you show it to the fire rescue board, they say that, thank you, but this is completely useless for us, because what we need to do, we need to do prevention, and we need to do reaction to those events. And an estimation of how many of those things across the Republic you need to do next month is not useful information, unfortunately, because it doesn't help with prevention, doesn't help with reaction. Only with reaction so much that you know that, okay, roughly that's how we need to have the manning levels, but where do those happen? No clue. Yeah. So the result of this project is to obviously not, I mean, we can predict that very accurately at the aggregate level, but the actual event happens here in the building. Within that minute, the fire breaks out. What I showed you was the country level in a month, which is not where the event actually occurs. Yeah? It's an aggregation of the results. So open data here, unfortunately, is not so useful. But when we now have actually data on 4 things now, I said 3 things are important, but we need to have data on 4 things. First of all, information on weather. How does it happen? Oh, sorry, this is partially in Estonia, but information on weather, that is completely open data. You look at the window, you essentially know that. You get weather forecast for the next 24 hours. That is pretty accurate, very useful information. We have information from the building registry, which actually is also open data, meaning that I can go and get information on the heating source, the last year of renovation on a building, and additional technical information from the building registry. So I can already get information on 2 things that jointly combined are correlated with fires. Prevention is also important because the fire rescue boat does prevention visits. So when they visit the household, I know that the risk should be lower there because they basically tell the residents that you need to put up some sort of, let's say, smoke detector or things like that in order to have a detection of a potential risk. So we need information on that as well. That is not public information, that comes from a different source. And people, that is private information. Who lives in that particular building? That sits in population registry. But we also need, as I told you, we need more precise information. We need to know whether this person is living alone. That comes from the population registry. We need certain social demographics, again, population registry. Whether this person has a substance abuse problem, we don't really know that. Or whether they had a disability, we also don't know. That sits in the e-health registry, and that is impossible to merge with these data sets because it's legally not okay to do that. But at least some information we get. So as a combination of weather, building, prevention, and people, we get something which is easier testable in a system that as weather and information changes, we see whether we can predict more accurately whether fire accidents will occur. And the result has been a particular application which is not live due to certain legal reasons, because it's being used actually by the fire rescue board to do prevention visits. So they can select a area, municipality, for example, and it gives us address-based information. This is basically, okay, sorry, this is in Estonia, but if you click on here, it shows you how many certain buildings are at risk given those conditions. So you can go down to building level. It's technically implemented by estimating those risks in a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer square, giving the weather, even people and buildings data. And the fire rescue board can use that now to do prevention visits into high-risk households. So you cannot really do reaction because reaction is a bit more difficult. It's not so easy to predict, but you can predict the overall risk level given the conditions and then do those visits in order to reduce those risks. And this application is a combination of closed and open data, but obviously a lot of data. Open data weather, open data building registry, closed data from over Dex Road, from population registry, and certain other social demographics from population registry as well. We combine all of those, and you can actually already get reasonably good low micro level predictions of those risks in order to do prevention, not dealing with consequences. So thanks to this, you can cut down maybe, let's say, visits to those at-risk households by 20%. You have spent less time and you have been more on point in going to households that are already at risk. And second thing, obviously, if you have prevented one accident occurring, you have saved public resources from reacting to that or dealing with treatment later or treating with public value not being created later on by a person who has been injured in a fire accident. So you actually have not only efficiency of prevention work increasing, but the effectiveness of prevention work increasing as well, and public value being saved. Or increased through it being prevented, or increased through a negative event being prevented from happening. Okay, but that was a lot of information, so I would stop here, and we still have a bit of time, so if there are questions, we can do a bit of discussion as well. Thanks.
Дякуємо, Міхелю. І ми маємо декілька запитань до вас, які я надіслала вам англійською у чаті. Подивіться, будь ласка, безпосередньо directly вам. 1 second. 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 1 second.
Okay, I see a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is risk management conducted by the national level, by central government authorities, or also at the local level? The last example I showed you here, that is, and the unemployment risk estimation, for example, as well, which is individualized level estimation. This is all done centrally because the central, government offices responsible for the policy response are the ones most capable of doing that. At the local level, for example, because local municipalities are responsible for providing certain social benefits. They have risk models that are implemented at the local level. So we don't even at the state level see that. For example, the local municipality pays out certain benefits for households who either need help with energy bills or additional, let's say, social services, and the evaluation whether that person is eligible for that, and whether this risk level that they are seeing there is so strong enough that it warrants the spending of local tax money on providing that service. That is done by social affairs departments at the local municipal level. But they use still central state registries for that. Plus additional information at the local level. So technically they run it on the local level, but the data still comes from centrally collected registries. Okay, and the second question was, are the services included in the unified system for public, or are there also services provided in specific municipalities? Yes, there are services provided in municipalities that we don't have available across the whole republic, because as I said, certain municipalities are simply much better, richer, better employed better in terms of resources of providing to social services. So, for example, where we see a larger differences again in some social services, for example, for elderly people who need help, elderly people who live alone, for example, which is a big risk group. For example, I don't know, they fall and they don't have anyone to help them. Ends up sort of a case that might be treated in a hospital, actually a relatively big problem. Elderly people, individuals living alone. For an aging society, becomes a larger problem in the future. There, the response is quite different depending on the municipality, because larger local municipalities, for example, can offer a service that is monitors whether a person has fallen or not for certain accelerators, which you can put on a person, or a alarm system within the apartment that detects that. This type of service is available only in larger municipalities because it's expensive to run, and also in urban environments, because there you have a concentration of people where it's easy to actually react to that as well. If you look at smaller rural municipalities, for example, they don't have that, not even available. Partially to cost levels and partially because it's an expensive service to maintain as well. So yes, I would say unfortunately it depends on the resource level of the municipality. But at the same time, because of those problems are bigger in bigger municipalities, because of more people living there, it a bit sort of evens out. Okay, the other questions are all in Ukrainian.
Міхелю, ми ще маємо запитання, яке стосується того, як налагоджена співпраця між університетом і безпосередньо міською радою. Навіть візьмемо приклад Тарту. Як ви співпрацюєте, на якому рівні і з якими департаментами міської ради ви працюєте в першу чергу? З чого почалася така співпраця?
Sorry, will you repeat that in English as well?
The question is that it is interesting from your experience how you are creating your connections between the university and municipality council. And what was the first steps of your cooperation?
Yeah,
because in Ukrainian experience, our communities, especially smaller communities, they do not have connections with the universities, but they have, and it will be useful for them, and they have to start And we would like to have advice from you how to create these connections and that it is really important.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because let's say even though our main mission at the university is to do research and teaching, but at the same time we have a requirement to also to do applied projects, meaning that we need to provide this public value not only which we get from research output and teaching people, but also to show how we have helped with dealing with certain social problems. So, I mean, essentially it goes both ways. There needs to be a bit of pressure on universities to do that. And our work is partially measured through a number of service contracts, applied service contracts that we actually are doing other than for the central government or for municipalities as well, meaning that we, from the university point of view, are actually inherently interested in getting those problems. Because our work is partially measured by that as well. And we get a lot of very good input into teaching, and especially in teaching how to model certain social problems with data, for example, because municipalities have those real life problems. Yeah? So these are not theoretical issues, they have really problems where we can show that actually if you solve that, you have social impact. So from the university side, there's a wish actually to do those and a certain pressure to actually do this. And we get partially additional financing for that as well, obviously, in order to do that. From the municipal side, yes, that is a bit more problematic, I would say. It's definitely easier, again, with larger municipalities, because first of all, they have their own development departments where certain types of problems are collected and solutions are looked for. So they actually have a partner for universities immediately. So not only the ones who run certain operative services, which is usually, I mean, they don't have really time to talk with universities about those issues, but those departments in charge for development, city services, they have the time and a bit more people to do that as well. So they actually put in requests for systems that university has developed to get those questions. We have certain portals, for example, where businesses and municipalities can go and simply put up a question that they have this particular problem. Would someone in the university know how to handle that? And this is then forward through university internal center to actual researchers in order to provide an answer there. So there's a channel that actually flows, gives that information to, drives that information to university people. And then obviously the third part of the equation, how is that then actually funded? That's a big problem. It's funded still, let's say, when we get that problem, we have to look for funding sources. We have basically solved that through two ways. One way is obviously that the municipality has some funding to do a seed project, you know, to do a bit of modeling, for example. But after that, when you really need to have a service put in place that needs development and really costs to run as well, where university needs to help with the modeling part, that needs to be separately funded. And usually that is done through different funding schemes where the municipality applies for funding to do that study and the service development. But that fund is state-owned fund, and the municipality applies that for that project to do it together with the university. So there are funding instruments available for that as well. I mean, all of those three things: university interest, municipality's ability to define problems and provide a partner to talk with the university, and the funding needs to be there. Otherwise, it's probably quite difficult.
І ще одне таке дуже практичне питання, яке цікавить зараз наших слухачів з невеликих громад. Як фахівець, порадьте, будь ласка, яку вибірку треба взяти, яку кількість респондентів треба опитати у відсотковому співвідношенні від населення, щоб можна було робити більш-менш ймовірний висновок, який буде валідизований по конкретному якомусь питанню. Тобто питання таке: скільки відсотків від населення громади треба опитати, щоб робити оцінку загальної думки громади по якомусь факту?
Sorry, you need to repeat that in English again. I don't get the translation, unfortunately.
Okay. The question is, from your experience, from your professional experience, how many people we have to ask about any issue within the small community, for example, how many in percentage level, to be sure that the estimation will be really correct in the result of this questioning or any investigation?
You mean in terms
Very
of
practical advice.
Yeah, you mean in terms of, let's say, looking for a solution, how many, from the university point of view, whether you would need to consult with multiple research groups, etc. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have solved that by usually. I mean, there usually is only one partner that in the end ends up obviously doing the work, but at least because the university and Ukrainian universities even more so are relatively big and in terms of research groups quite diverse. So even I don't know how many of those 2,000 plus researchers at the University of Tartu, what are they exactly doing? But we know for those problems that come from a municipal point of view, we might actually need a combination of skills from, let's say, my group and someone else's group in order to provide a solution or a response to that particular municipal question. So the university has done a system where we actually have a overview of who does what in terms of research projects and publications, which is probably the best proxy whether they actually know a bit about that particular problem or how the methods. So when the request comes into the university, there's an aggregator within the university who then goes through this particular list of research groups that might be helping and approaches the ones who might be the closest to. So usually they ask from multiple research groups. In the end, is formed another sort of group or a bunch of people who then really start to work on that project. But at least there's a single point of contact within the university who knows what everyone is doing, and they are actually the ones who then pick those that might be able to respond, because not all of them have obviously time as well. So there's some sort of node within the university that actually does that aggregation. So usually, yes, it's not, municipality is not approaching single individuals, but coming to the university, and within the university, we put in a response to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your response. And one more practical question. One more practical question concerning your advice from your side. If we want to learn, for example, how people perceive possibility to celebrate New Year in their community, in the city center, and how the New Year tree have to look like. And community is, for example, 30,000 inhabitants are living in the community, 30,000. How many respondents we have to ask to have a validative answer?
Okay, now I get it. I mean, it was sort of a question of sample size representativeness, basically. I mean, for 30,000 set of municipalities, in the end, this representativeness depends on whether everyone within that 30,000 size community has the equal probability of becoming a member, ending up in the sample. So usually, I mean, what we still do, even with 30,000 people, that's a small size, but in order to get, because we need to do statistical analysis and get statistical power as well, everything below, let's say, below 1,000 is already problematic. I would say I would not work with 800 to 700 respondents, but they would have to be picked at random. So stratified random sampling, that's what I would sort of use there. But then you have still relatively many people in order to do statistical analysis and see associations, whether they have some sort of statistical power and be able to say that, okay, this is representative and useful for us. But I mean, it depends a bit as always.
Thank you for that explanation. I think that our audience have a lot of good advices today. And thank you for the support from your side and for the cooperation with the Association of Ukrainian Cities. By the way, we have representatives from all over the Ukraine in this electronic conference. And we hope that those information and besides your presentation, they will use in their day-to-day work. They will really have good advices and good examples how to use those data that they can get from the universities. And of course, we do not have such a good compliance between the data from all companies that are collecting data in Ukraine. But at the same time, we can request for those data that are not existing, and it will be development of the whole market of data. And in this period of development, Ukraine is using a lot of financial support from EU fundings. And I think that it's good possibility to use those participation in EU programs to develop data collecting and analysis of those data, while in local councils they are making very important decisions, because electronic democracy starts from including human prejudices while we are making decisions on the governmental and local governmental level. And thank you, dear Michal, for your advices. Thank you for the possibility to learn your experience from your presentation. We will definitely share it with our representatives and participants of today's meeting. And we hope that once upon a time you will agree again to participate in our open webinars for local governmental officials in Ukraine. Thank you once more.
Thank you very much.
On
Thank
behalf
you for
of Association of Ukrainian Cities and Association of Dutch municipalities that are supporting Ukraine with the help of the project which supports recovery of Ukrainian communities. Thank you once more. And I'm moving to Ukrainian channel. Дорогі колеги, користуючись нагодою, ми дякуємо всім від імені Асоціації міст України і від імені Асоціації міст Нідерландів, Агенції з міжнародного розвитку, Асоціації міст Нідерландів. Ми вітаємо кожного з вас з прийдешніми святами, з Різдвом Христовим та з Новим роком. Нехай в ваших громадах панує мир, спокій, нехай ваші бюджети плавно наповнюються і зростають, нехай наші поради будуть корисними у відновленні ваших громад. Ну і найважливіше, нехай ваші домівки сповнюються щастям, спокоєм і затишком. Нехай ваші дітки будуть здоровими, а родини максимально щасливими. Тримайтеся, з прийдешніми святами вас і до нової зустрічі. Наступний наш вебінар ми плануємо вже у січні. Це буде в середу, 22 січня, але ми запросимо кожного, хто зареєструвався на нашому спеціальному порталі. Так що ще раз дякуємо. З вами була команда VNG International та представниця Асоціації міст України пані Ксенія Гірчак, комунікаційниця Асоціації міст України. Так що теж давайте подякуємо всім, хто з нами сьогодні відпрацював, і особливо дякуємо Міхкелю Солваку за прихильність і готовність обмінюватися своїм досвідом із нами, представниками українського місцевого самоврядування. До нової зустрічі, дякуємо, до побачення.